Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have the privilege of talking with Kevin J. Anderson, New York Times best-selling author of, I think it's 170 books now?
180 or
180,
so.
man. Every time we do
Who
the math.
counts? Who
exactly.
counts?
I'm sure Miss
Well,
Rebecca
my wife counted, so it was 180 the last time we checked.
Wow, that's crazy. You got to do a party for when you guys hit 200. There's
But
got to be
who
something.
keeps track? I'm writing. I'm writing all the time. I don't count. So
So the first question I have for you is about one of your recent releases, your Dan Shamble series. So you've been working on that for the last while, and it is it is Kickstarter mostly to start it out. And I know you do the audiobooks, some of them. So I wanted to ask what the process has been for publishing them and why you went with that route as opposed to one of the other publishing routes.
well, so I'm kind of known for writing all these big, epic Dune, Star Wars, Saga of Seven Sons, the big serious things.
Yep.
And I like to think I'm kind of funny in person. I really enjoy telling dumb dad jokes and things like that. And after a while, it just got like the stuff I'm writing is so serious, and I got this idea for a zombie PI series. It's kind of like the Munsters and the Addams Family and the Naked Gun. I mean, it's downright laugh out loud silly, and he solves cases with werewolves and mummies and vampires, and it's just it's meant to be kind of ridiculous, and I just have a blast writing those. And so I wrote one. I wrote the first one. I can't get this out of my head. I'm just going to write it. So I wrote it, and I sent it to my agent, and he said, "This is hilarious, but Kevin Anderson can't write funny stuff." And I went, "Well, but you just said it was hilarious." and he said, "Yeah, but we can't sell this because you don't write funny stuff."
I get it.
But I was kind of upset. I went, but I love this. It's really good. But it was off-brand, I guess. Well, my regular publishers didn't want it because they want to do big Dune and everything, which I love doing those too. That's fine. And then we sold it to another traditional publisher that I had never been with before, and they bought the first three. But this is kind of a transition period from old traditional publishing and the old ways of doing things, which let's just say are glacially slow. And so they bought the first three, and these are books that are fun and fast and hilarious, and you read one and you want the next one pretty fast. Well, the publisher didn't want to schedule them more than a year and a half apart.
Oh, that's
And I went, that's like a TV series that has one episode every 6 months. So they didn't do as well as we wanted, and I finally got the rights back, and I republished them with my own Wordfire Press. And I really liked them, but they did okay. They were an indie published book, but the fans kept asking for more, and so I wrote one and a new one and published it. And so now we're up to like six books in the series, and I was sad because I really loved these books, but they just kind of weren't getting the audience I wanted. And then a friend of mine said, "Well, if the fans want it, you should run a Kickstarter for it." And I went, "Well, I've never run a Kickstarter before." And I went, "Isn't Kickstarters like for the poor, starving writers that say, 'Give me money because I can't afford this'?" And he went, "Oh, that's not what it is at all."
Well, Brandon Sanderson proved that
Well,
was not the
he proved
case.
that. Well, no, I mean, a Kickstarter is sort of a letting people get a first look because they get the books before anybody else, and it's kind of like this backstage club, and they get to see special editions and things. So I ran my first Kickstarter for, okay, let's see if people want me to do a new Dan Shamble novel. It raised 3 times the money that I ever got paid from the other publisher, and I went, I like this. And I've since done the next one by Kickstarter, which also raised a whole bunch more than the other publisher did. And I have just finished the next book in the series. I try to do like one a year. But I want to make this one even bigger. So my October Kickstarter for Dan Shamble is going to be a new novel, a new story collection, a Dan Shamble card game, and a Dan Shamble jigsaw puzzle.
Nice.
We're calling it the Zombie PI Apocalypse Pack. So we're doing that.
I
But the whole thing is it's sort of a do-it-yourself, and that it cuts out all the middlemen between the author and the audience. Like in traditional publishing, there are I write a book, I send it to my agent. The agent sends it to the editor, and the editor works on it. It goes to the marketing department, and then the publisher releases it, and then their sales reps go to the bookstores, and then the bookstores carry it, and then the people buy it. That's all those steps that I don't have to do with Kickstarter, because people back the Kickstarter, they pay me the money up front, I send them the book when it's done.
And you know how much to make, at least at the beginning, so you don't have to overbuy or underbuy.
Yeah, so it's I think it's great. So anyway, the Dan Shamble stuff has come back from the dead because of Kickstarter, and I love these. And so the new one is called Horn Dogs.
Yes, if you couldn't tell the punny jokes in the series.
Yes, well, but it's about unicorns and their dogs, which have horns in there, so they're horn dogs.
So that's not the only series that you've been working on, or the only book that you've been in Kickstarter with. You also have this brand new book, Persephone, which just came out earlier this year. I actually backed this Kickstarter.
Thank you.
And I read the book, and I had a blast with it. I loved the twists near the
Cool.
end. So my question is, what was it like working with Jeffrey Morris on a book that was supposed to be, or that was originally a movie script, and you adapted it to the book format?
So Jeffrey Morris is writer-director, good friend of mine, and he's been working on Persephone for a long. Persephone is kind of like The Martian, but on Alpha Centauri. It's like the first handful of people that get to Proxima Centauri, and it's a pretty hellish planet, and they're trying to survive. And of course, everything goes wrong because that makes an interesting book. And so Jeffrey had written the movie script, and I worked with him on the movie script, and we went through a bunch of iterations, enough that I get a co-story credit on the movie. So we had that, and then he had asked me to, he found some funding, and he got me to write the novel version of it just so that he could print up 100 copies to hand around to investors and things. The movie business is crazy. Let's just keep that as a thing. So the whole... Jeffrey says he spends like 3/4 of his time chasing around, like getting investors and everything, rather than doing the actual filmmaking. Anyway, he wanted to have a book that he could show off because it has more gravitas if you have a book on it, and my name has some gravitas with the bestsellers and things I've had. So I kind of wrote this draft of the book, and we published it in 100 copies that are sitting out there. And then I started doing so well with my Kickstarters that Jeffrey and I talked, we said, why don't we really polish this thing up, and we'll just publish it ourselves, and we'll run the Kickstarter. And that one really took off. It did very well. And so we published the book ourselves and gave it to the Kickstarter backers. We just finished the audiobook. And that, in turn, generated more interest in the movie, so now we've got more people willing to invest in it. And the process is as long as getting to Alpha Centauri, practically. But anyway, so that's kind of generated more interest. But here's kind of the twisting the knife, or the neener thing. Because there's more interest in the movie, we are kind of holding off on releasing the book to the public, not to the Kickstarter backers, because if the movie's actually getting made, then maybe we can sell it to Tor Books or one of my other publishers. And so if you didn't back the Kickstarter, it's going to be hard for you to read Persephone for a little while at least.
But when it does eventually come out, you should read it because it's really good. You're talking about books that tie into things. You have written or co-written some of the Dune books with Brian Herbert, and you've done prequels, you've done sequels. I believe the most recent was the prequel Princess of Dune that came out last year, and of course you're thinking about not just the original Dune novel but all the whole Dune universe. So I wanted to ask what the process has been collaborating with Brian to determine where each book should go and when, in what order you guys publish them.
Well, let me back up. So I was a huge Dune fan forever, and I read all of Frank's books, and I read each one as they came out. God Emperor of Dune was the first book I ever bought in hardcover with my own money. I was like 13 or something like that. And I read them all, and Frank had this big story going on, and the last one that he wrote was called Chapter House Dune.
Yeah.
Dune, that was number 6. And then it ends on this cliffhanger, a Luke, I am your father kind of cliffhanger. And then Frank Herbert passed away. And I'm like, I desperately want to know, like, where does the story go? You can't just leave those characters there. And after like 10 years, I didn't see it. And I knew that Brian Herbert had worked with his father, was an accomplished science fiction author of his own. And finally, in fact, it was through somebody at DragonCon who connected me with Brian Herbert, gave me his address. And I wrote him a letter explaining my passion for the Dune universe, and the story has to be finished. So was he ever going to finish it, or could we maybe work together if he wasn't? And he called me, and we hit it off right away, and we kind of brainstormed a little bit and decided that, yeah, maybe we really should finish it. Because it's obvious it needs to be finished. It's just stop. But the thing was, after we started brainstorming, everybody read Frank's Dune, the original Dune.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of people read through Children of Dune, the first 3 books.
Yeah.
And then book 4 got Emperor of Dune. A lot of people kind of dropped off, and then the last ones got a little more esoteric. And so now it's been like a dozen years after Chapter House Dune had come out, the last one Frank did. And if we just said, okay, it's been 12 years, and here's the last book after most of you didn't read the last several, that we decided that wasn't the best way to get people really interested in Dune again. So what would be a good way to get people interested in Dune? Because I love the original Dune so much. So what we decided to do was a prequel trilogy. So it's the young Duke Leto and how he meets Lady Jessica and their first battles with the Baron Harkonnen and all that stuff. So and the trilogy, spoiler alert, ends with Paul being born. I mean, that's the time frame that it is. Yeah. So we did those as our first trilogy. And they sold like crazy. They were called a runaway bestseller, which sounds great, but it's not, because it means that the books sold faster than they could print them. So there weren't even books in the bookstore when we were on the bestseller list. But those did really great. And we had found Frank's last outline for how he wanted to end that last book after Chapter House Dune. So we had that, but there's a bunch of stuff to set up in it. And this huge pivotal event in the Dune universe is called the Butlerian Jihad. It's the war against the thinking machines and how that's why there's no like technology in the Dune universe. It's all very medieval technology. So we needed to tell that whole story of the Butlerian Jihad. So we went back 10,000 years before Dune, and then we told that story, at which point we had everything set up so we could write the grand finale based on Frank's last outline. So as you can see, this time frame is kind of jumping all over the place. And then after we finished, it was 2 books, Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. And then we went back and found like places that really needed more story in it. And in fact, so there's Dune is the first novel, and Dune Messiah is the second novel. Dune ends with Paul's going to overthrow the evil empire, and he's going to marry the princess, and he's leading the Fremen. And then Dune Messiah opens up 12 or 15 years later, and this giant jihad is over, and Paul's this evil tyrant that everybody hates, and these people keep trying to assassinate him. And we just went, well, how does the hero become a tyrant? This seems like you skipped a big part there. It's like, here's cute Anakin Skywalker, and then here's Darth Vader. Like, wait, you kind of missed a step. So we told that story, and so we've kind of fit different places in, and Princess of Dune, because the second movie, Dune Part 2, was coming out. Chani, the Zendaya character, and Princess Irulan, the Frances Pugh character, they're very important characters in the second half of Dune. And their story had never been told. I mean, Princess Irulan growing up in the Imperial Palace, and Chani being trained as a Fremen warrior. So those are the two princesses of Dune that we wrote for that. And nothing on the docket right now. We've done 19 novels and 2 story collections. Never going to say we're not going to do any more, but there's nothing we're working on at this very moment except for movies, TV show, graphic novels, all kinds of things. So,
which I know we're not allowed to talk about it, but I'll just bring up that there is a TV show inspired by Sisterhood of Dune.
I mean, it's Dune Prophecy. It comes out in November from HBO Max, from Legendary. So and Brian and I are part of it. I'm a co-producer, and we're involved. But Can't talk about it.
Yep. Oh, no, we're not breaking.
I'm going to be doing a good. I'm a good boy. I'm following instructions.
So my next question is about another big space opera-ish series you've been involved in, or not involved in, that you created, and that being your Saga: The Seven Sons, which I just read through the last couple of years, and I loved it, and it was so huge that I don't know if I've read any science fiction books that had so many POV characters interacting, going around, and it was huge, and every character had an important story. But you could
keep track of it.
I could, and so my question for you is, when you were writing it, how were you able to make sure that you balanced everything? None of the stories got lost, none of the stories seemed boring. How did you ensure that many stories had balance?
Well, I know some writers don't like to hear this, but I plot everything very carefully ahead of time. It's sort of like, if you're going to have this huge Broadway musical number where all the Rockettes are dancing and stuff, you can't just say, go out there and dance and work it out. Yep. I mean, you've got to spend a lot of time rehearsing and choreographing things. And so I would outline, I plot it very carefully, but as I'm outlining the chapters, I have them on like Microsoft Word, and they're all color-coded. Like, this character's green, and this character's red, and this character's orange, and this character's black, and this character's pink, or something like that. And so I would kind of plot out each storyline, and then you'd take those storylines and then weave them together. And it's sort of like, I'm trying to think of an example of like a symphony where they just play one instrument at a time, and then they bring in another one, and they bring in another one, and they bring in another one. Pretty much soon it's like this grand crescendo.
Right.
And it's very carefully worked things out. But Seven Sons is my love letter to science fiction. It's got everything I love about science fiction in it, from ancient alien races and terrible planets and space battles and killer robots and political intrigue and I mean, I love it. And it's a little frustrating to me because it's been basically out of print from the original publisher for a while. Well, it's not entirely. It's like 3 of the volumes are out of print, which means, well, how do you read the series if you can't get them all? So for a year and a half now, we've been working to try to get the rights back so that we can reissue them, which will be another Kickstarter if we ever get it done. But my entire experience with publishing, my first novel was published 34 years ago. Wow. And so I grew up, and I really learned how to do the traditional, I've been published by Bain and Tor and HarperCollins and Bantam and Simon & Schuster and Ace, I mean, all of them, whatever they are.
Yeah.
But things have just, in the past 10, 15 years, they've changed like dinosaurs and mammals. I mean, it's like hugely changed. And it used to be that authors were, I mean, it was, you'd go into your room and you'd sob into your pillow when a publisher let your book go out of print. And now you're just sort of like, please let it go out of print, so I can get the rights back. And because I'm experienced in, I mean, I know how to do publishing. I know how to do cover design. I know how to do marketing. I know how to do it all. And I kind of a control freak, and I want to do it. So the upshot is I would love to get those books back so that I can reissue my own Saga of Seven Sons, because there's a sequel trilogy, which I do have the rights back for, right. And then there's there's a prequel short novel, and there's a connecting short novel, and I
knew about the sequels. I didn't know about the prequel novels.
Yeah, well, there's one prequel novel.
Prequel novel,
and so they're all there, and just hoping, but it's a waiting game, and we'll see. Not that I have nothing else to do in the meantime.
Right.
But
you have a lot of series coming out, but you do have one trilogy that came out recently, and this is my personal favorite of yours, and that's the Wake of the Dragon series.
Thank you.
I loved it. And back in 2019, right when the first book was coming out, you came down to Georgia to a really, really small convention, and you were talking about the book, and that's how I got into it. And the pitch that was for it was, do you like Game of Thrones, but you want it to be completed? Well, it's going to be completed, and you completed it very fast. And so
one book a year. I mean, that's kind of my pace to write a big book like that a year. And
so the question I have is that a series that you had been planning for a long time and then just breezed through, or was that a series that it just came to you and you just did it right when you got the idea?
I had some of the ideas for it, and I kind of knew the basic thing, and I had just before that I had finished writing the sequel trilogy to Saga of Seven Sons. So I'd just done these 3, like The Expanse, giant epic science fiction, and this is what's always hurt me as a writer, that you don't know what a Kevin Anderson novel is, because I write fantasy here, I write zombie detectives, I write space opera,
Right.
because I read all of that, and I just like, I feel like doing a zombie detective today.
Yep.
And after I finished like 3 or 4 years of writing those enormous science fiction things, I was ready to do some fantasy.
Yep.
And I'm a big fantasy reader, and I love that. And so I wrote up the outline and I pitched it to Tor, like, okay, you've done my sequel to Seven Sons, and now I want to do a fantasy. And you know, Tor does very well with fantasy, so they were very happy about that. So we did that next, and that's kind of all consuming, because one of my superpowers is to do good world building. I mean, I spent a lot of time with all the cultures and religions and economics and the geography and everything. And so this was a big, heavy lift to get this entire world and the mythos and everything built. It's not just, here we are, generic medieval village where the guy has a sword and he has a horse and nobody knows what people do for a living or anything. And I worked everything out. And my characters span, like, the king's a character and this peasant's a character, that they go all the way through and they all interact. And the story just gets... I said this to Brandon Sanderson once we were on a panel. I said, like, who's the main character in the Saga of Seven Sons? Like, the story is the main character. The story is the main character. It's this giant plot that moves forward. And
I would argue the main character was actually the kind of the villain of the Saga of the Seven Sons, the guy that was, and why am I blanking on
the
his
chairman?
name? Yeah, the chairman. He had a really cool name, and why am I blanking on it?
Basil Wenceslas.
Wenceslas, yes, that's right, Wenceslas, because I always thought of the song.
The king,
that's right, King Wenceslas.
Well, he wasn't good chairman Wenceslas.
Yeah, he was not a good chairman, but I thought, because it's kind of like Thanos in Infinity War was the main character of that movie. I felt like Wenceslas, because he's the one around everything that's happening.
Well, but the real cool, kind of getting off track, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. The kind of cool thing about that is, when you start reading him, that he's a Jeff Bezos. I mean, I don't mean that as bad. He's like running this huge federation, and he kind of wants everybody to do what they're supposed to do so that the government doesn't fall apart.
Right. Yeah.
And you kind of sympathize with him, but then he kind of starts going off over a course of 7 books, though. Things get worse and worse, and humanity might be going extinct, and this galactic war is happening, and he's getting pissed off because if you guys would just fall in line, we could have beaten the aliens in this battle, but no, you had to do your stupid independent thing, and you can. So, creative writing lesson that I loved was that no bad guy ever thinks he's the bad guy, and I remember reading Stephen King's The Shining, and you're inside Jack Torrance's head, the Jack Nicholson character, and he's going crazy, slowly going crazy, and he's getting it into his head that the reason that everything's gone wrong for him in his life is because, if I remember right, the son that they had was unplanned, so all of a sudden he's got this kid, and his wife is nagging him that he should get a job and do something. And so he's like going down this rabbit hole that his life would be just fine if it wasn't for this kid that he didn't want, and his wife who's causing him trouble. And you read this passage, and he's getting to the point where it would just be great if I took this big, like, croquet mallet and bashed the kid's head in. And I remember reading through that and just going page after page, reading through that, and I was like, yeah, we got to bash the kid's head in. And I stopped and went, what am I thinking here? But I loved how he led us down that, and that's kind of what I wanted to do with all these characters, is that everything they do extends naturally from what they were doing. And it's not at all, I want to rule the world. Have you seen the presidential campaign? Who wants to rule the world? I mean, really? But Anyway, we don't go down the political road. So,
You also wrote The Last Days of Krypton, which basically took all of the different varying origins of Krypton and before Superman became Superman, and you kind of tried to make sense out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think that's such a cool concept that franchises could do that. So I wanted to know if you've ever been approached by another franchise to do something similar.
is that a plant? Do you know the answer to that?
I do know the answer.
Okay.
I just wanted to do that.
Well, I mean, I was a Superman fan forever, but
Right.
I liked the science fiction part of it, and I kept thinking. So, Last Days of Krypton, like the Last Days of Pompeii, Last Days of Krypton is the story of Jor-El and Lara and General Zod's rebellion and how Brainiac steals the city of Kandor, and all these things are Superman lore.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at each thing individually, and you go, well, how does that coexist with that and that? And I kept working on it, and the whole thing is so if Krypton is the most advanced, this is stated so, the most advanced planet in 13 galaxies, and I'm going, well, how come they've only got one spaceship on the planet, and who builds a spaceship that's only baby size? I mean, build one that can take mom, dad, and the kid, right? If you're going to escape, and then. Well, why did Krypton explode, and what's going on there? And we know Jor-El discovered the Phantom Zone, and I mean, all these things come together, and I started going, well, and how did General Zod take over in the Civil War kind of thing? And I went, well, if Brainiac steals the city of Kandor, that's going to leave this giant power vacuum on Krypton, which would allow someone like General Zod to take over. And I'm just going, all these dominoes are falling into place. And I'm just this has got some real potential. And ironically, the vice president of DC Comics is a huge fan of our Dune books.
Yeah.
And I was always signing, I'd send him a copy of the Dune books when they come out. And so I know him, and I have his phone number, and I called up. I said, Paul, I've got the best idea ever. I want to do this Last Days of Krypton thing. And he said, that's the best idea ever. Let's go do it as a novel. So that's kind of how I got my foot into that. And it just, everything fell into place, and everything really worked, and I loved it. And I'm passionate about Superman and everything. And after I did that, I mean, I think I did a pretty good job. I mean, everything really does tie together in that. And I got approached by Hasbro, the Transformers people, and they said, man, you did such a great job making sense out of all the Krypton stuff, and you retconned everything. It all really, really worked, and we'd love for you to write this novel for Transformers that pulls everything together. Mm-hmm. Now, I grew up with Superman. I grew up with the comics and everything, so this is in my DNA. Transformers was, I was too old for Transformers, so I never got into it when they came out, and so I never watched the show, so it was all new to me. And I went, well, and they're like, we really want you to do this, and they're offering me this really big contract to do it. And I went, well, sure, just send me all the materials and I'll look at it. So I got a bunch of their books and comics, and I watched a bunch of the at the time they sent me VHS tapes with bootleg Transformers cartoons on them and stuff. And I'm watching it, and remember, this is a big contract they're offering. I'm like, oh, hey, let's do this. And I just, I couldn't. I came back. I just said, I'm sorry. This isn't in me, and I can't make sense out of all this stuff. So couldn't do it.
But I just love that idea of hiring an author to pull things
we
together.
screwed it all up. Fix this for us.
Yes. That usually happens on a much more small level. Hey, there's this detail we need to fix in this franchise. Can you include in your book the answer to it? That's I think more common.
Well, and I've actually done this a couple of times at video games where they'll have these video games that the science fiction game or a fantasy game or something, and they've got all their crews, their large teams of people that they're building their fantasy world, and they're kind of like cats running loose. That this team's we're gonna do zombies in the Middle Ages, and we're gonna do dwarves, and they all do this stuff, and after they've spent umpty-ump millions of dollars of development, they realize that their story doesn't make any sense, and so then I've been hired by a couple of Kevin, read all this stuff and make sense out of this for us, and I've done that. I would like to say if you had hired me like at the
Earlier.
beginning stages, we could have headed off at the pass.
Much
but
easier.
Anyway, so if you can't tell, I kind of love what I'm doing.
Oh,
That
of
I'm
course.
a professional fanboy. I really enjoy doing this stuff.
You get to be in part of so many franchises, so many genres, and but you also have another side of the business that you're part of, which is the Writers of the Future, and you are part of these groups that are trying to bring up new writers and give new opportunities and stuff. And so I wanted to ask you about why do you think these organizations like Writers of the Future are so important for the next generation of authors?
Well, when I was starting out, I had some pretty amazing mentors. Dean Koontz took me under his wing.
Really?
Terry Brooks took me under his wing.
I didn't know that.
And I'm just sort of, I mean, they're good friends of mine, but I'm like, I was just this little dweeby author with like a few stories published, and Dean Koontz was, well, I'll give you advice on that. And in fact, Dean, we were having dinner with him and his wife once, and I after I was very successful, and we were having dinner, and I just said, well, Dean, back when I was like, I had one novel published, and I was just starting out, and you gave me so much advice. I said, what was it that you saw in me that you decided to do all this help? And he said, well, I offered advice to a lot of people, and you were the only one who listened.
And
So
yeah,
there.
I mean, you did this on Dean Koontz, but
Yeah.
how successful he is, you should.
So I feel it's very important to pay it forward because people helped me, and we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, even if they weren't actual mentors of mine, and I never met Frank Herbert, but just reading his work just gave me so much help and inspiration. And it really, I like teaching, and I like sharing and mentoring. I don't really like workshopping stories, so when people send me a story, I kind of like, I don't really like doing that. But I love like doing business advice and helping them out. And so it was about 15 years ago now that me and my wife, Rebecca Mesta, and David Farland, and Eric Flint, and Brandon Sanderson, we were exchanging professional advice amongst each other. Because once you get to be like a best-selling author, there's not that many people that you can complain to because they all sort of like, oh, I wish I had your problems.
Right.
But I really do want to, well, Brandon, how did you pull that off and
Right.
thing? So we exchanged our own information, and we thought that was so useful. We decided to put on a writing seminar that we kind of shared these inside secrets and business stuff. And that was the first Superstars writing seminar.
Yeah.
And so we put that together, and we're now in year 15, and we've had, Tony Weisskopf at Bain, and we've had several Tor editors, and we have HarperCollins editors, and we've had people from Audible.com and Amazon, and all these people just coming and giving their advice and workshops, and that sort of spun off. I'm now running an entire graduate program in publishing.
That's right.
I teach a master's degree in publishing for Western Colorado University, and I'm just starting my 6th year of that. So I've now unleashed 53 Jedi Masters of Publishing out there. And to my knowledge, we are the only graduate program that teaches full-on indie publishing.
Really?
All the other ones out there that I mean, I've studied them, and all I've saw that they're teaching you how to be an editorial assistant in Manhattan and earning $20,000 a year. And I went, that's not what somebody wants to get a graduate degree for. They all want to know how to get into Kindle Unlimited and how to run Kickstarters and Patreons and all these things. And so we teach that, and it's been a very successful program, and I enjoy doing that a lot. And I have some, I mean, when I see some of the people. And getting back to Writers of the Future, I've been a judge of that for 30 years. I mean, for a long time. And I just love mentoring these. These are the kind of the cream of the crop, new writers that come in, and we spend a week with them in a very intensive workshop. And I just look back at all these new writers that we have mentored, and the list of people who have published novels and won awards. One has even won an Academy Award, and some have won National Book Awards and things, and Hugos and Nebulas, and I mean, not that the awards are a thing, but they're best-selling authors as well. So I like teaching stuff that has a tangible effect rather than just, Abyssinian basket weaving now or something like that.
And it's also great that, like, whenever I see publishing publishing authors, people who have been in the business, and yet they're the ones that are teaching, because so many college classes that have to do with writing, it's someone who majored in writing and then went straight to the profession, or being a professor. And so it's great when, like, people like you or Brandon Sanderson actually teach the classes, because you have that practical experience. That
and all I teach is the practical stuff. You
Yeah.
throw the theory out the window. You don't need to know the theory of font design. I just want you to pick the right font. And but so mine, we'll do the plug. My website is Wordfire, like words on fire, wordfire.com, and there's a section on the master's program there if anybody wants, because we are open for applications, and we always, the program's doing great. It's not like I'm scrounging for people, but I want to get students who are watching this podcast rather than somebody who saw an ad in a literary journal somewhere.
Right.
If that makes any sense. I want people whose mindset is, I want to be Bane when I grow up. I want to publish science fiction books, and I want to, because I connect better with those people as a teacher. Not that we've had wonderful students who are like literally poetry majors or whatever. That's fine. But my people are the ones who are here at DragonCon.
Right. Oh, of course. So you actually, that was a good segue into my next question. You mentioned Wordfire Press, which is the publishing group that you made with your wife. That I looked back. It says it was created in 2004, so that means it's 20 years old this year.
I hadn't thought of that.
So I wanted to ask you to think back on the company, and they don't just publish your stuff, you have a lot of other authors that you've reprinted or republished stuff for them, and so I wanted you to talk about why you think Wordfire Press has been so successful, and in a similar vein, if someone else has a similar idea, what was the piece of advice you wish you had known when you were starting Wordfire Press?
Don't do it! Don't do it! Dealing with authors is crazy. Don't deal with authors. You're reminding me with the 2004. So Wordfire Press, Rebecca's dad had written this religious treatise analyzing the tribulation and revelations and stuff like that. So he was a Baptist minister, and that was something that fascinated him. And he had written this book, and nobody wanted this book. But Rebecca wanted to publish it for her dad, so he'd have, and he did a couple dozen copies and things. And so we had both worked in the publishing industry, so we knew how to make a book. And so Wordfire Press was formed just so we could publish her dad's book. And so we got some copies of it. And that's all it was for. That was 2004.
Yeah.
Well, so Wordfire Press existed, but then coming around 2008 or so, that's when the publishing world just started metamorphosing. Other people could say that's when the meteor hit the industry. That there was, and I give talks about the perfect storm that created indie publishing, because 2008, just the Reader's Digest version, like that's when Kindle came out. First Kindle. Borders books closed. Advances dropped for authors like precipitously, like 90%. They just crashed, and so we couldn't make any money anymore. But people like me I had tons of books that were out of print, and I had all the rights to, so I could just publish my own books. And another thing was that suddenly all these cover stock art design, you could buy cover art for $20. That shows up. So, like, all these different things happen. Like, this is gonna create indie publishing. And I started seeing all that, and then I had another friend of mine who kept saying, Kevin, put your books up on Kindle. And he kind of twisted my arm, and he did it. He put up like 3 of my old books. And holy cow, in a year they made as much as the old publishers that ever paid me for them. And I went, oh, I like this. And I've got 30 books that are out of print.
Exactly.
So we started putting up mine, and then a bunch of my other science fiction author friends were like, hey, I've got a bunch of books that are out of print, and I want them to come out too. But they didn't want to learn how to do it. And so I said, well, I'll publish Frank Herbert's backlist, and I'll publish Mike Resnick's books, and I'll publish Jody Lynn Nye's books, and I'll publish Alan Dean Foster's books. And I mean, these are all friends of mine, so they trusted me, and it just kind of mushroomed out of our control. So we were like printing books all over. Locust Magazine listed us as like the number 6 publisher of science fiction because we produced so many books.
Wow.
I mean, so that became huge, a huge amount of work. And we kind of, in the last few years, we've done some real reassessments because I'm a writer. I know how to publish things, but I'm a writer, not a publisher. And my publishing work for Wordfire was taking like way more than half of my energy. In fact, I went up for a hike one day and I came back home to 100 emails, and 80 of the emails were Wordfire Press stuff. And I just went, okay, we have to pull back on that. So now, I mentioned my graduate program. So the students themselves publish like 16 books a year through Wordfire Press. And then Kevin, do like, say, 4 books a year, whether it's a reissue of something or a collection or a new Dan Shamble novel or whatever. And so our catalog is full up with just student books and Kevin books. And I just don't want to do books with other authors anymore. There's just so much extra work.
Right.
Even when they're great authors, there's just so much extra steps to be doing it. If Stephen King or Dean Koontz is desperate for a publisher and they really want one, we could make an exception. But just the whole process of reading the submissions and dealing with the authors and then editing them and all that, it's publishing's not easy. So
But you learned a lot from it, and now you're imparting
well,
it.
I know how to do it. And man, the books that we're producing, you put them on a shelf next to anything from Simon and Schuster, and ours look just fine. And the tools are out there. It's just amazing what you can do these days.
So I have to get in a single Star Wars question, or my audience would kill me. So my Star Wars.
Well, it's only been 3 hours, hasn't it?
So the Star Wars question I have, real quick, is when it came to collaborating with the other authors, there were often times where they were using your characters and you were using theirs. So I was wondering, did you do a lot of back in the '90s when you were involved? Were you reading other books as they were coming out, or did you guys only talk on the
Tim
phone?
Zahn was sending me his manuscripts. I mean, we were reading them as we were doing it. We were often on the phone. Mike Stackpole's book, I, Jedi, is like literally woven in among my Jedi Academy trilogy. And but at the time, there were a smaller number of authors.
Right.
And shall we just say there was no Disney. And it was kind of our club that we were like, hey, can I blow up your holocron? And we would just do that. But as they kept rapidly, there's like 50, 60 books, and then Lucasfilm had to bring in somebody to be sort of the shepherd and the cat herder, and figure things out. And I mean those were really fun times. And I keep getting asked by people of like, are you ever going to do another Star Wars book?
Very different.
That ship has sailed because there have been 300 and some books since I wrote my last one.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to read 300 books to get up to speed on something. And there have been so many movies and TV shows that I'm just, I love it. I still watch everything that comes out, but I just don't think that I can step into those shoes again.
I completely understand. So
besides, I've got this Dune thing.
Yeah, you got a lot with Dune that you're working on. So, and I'm loving those Dune books. So I want to give you the time to talk about any upcoming projects or anything new that you're unveiling soon.
Well, the biggest thing, which will be like right when this is broadcast, it's technically September 3rd, and this is going to be a few days from that. Because my Kickstarters did so well, and I really love that way of getting connected directly with your fans. Like this is bringing your super fans over for dinner, basically. So we are forming my own Patreon finally. A lot of authors have a Patreon. And so we're finally launching a Patreon. It's a long URL, which is really hard to remember, patreon.com/Kevin J. Anderson. So we're doing the Patreon, and the Patreon is really sort of the backstage club, the inside. So different levels that you can have, but I'm going to do like a really expanded newsletter where on Facebook and on social media, I'll be posting some hiking photos and things. But this is like the full on. Here's the whole camping trip, and here's that. I'll post a bunch of cat photos, and I cook all the time. I post pictures of my green chili stew recipe, and I pick pictures of it, and everybody's always asking me for my recipes, and I hate that because I kind of cook without recipes. So, but for Patreon, I'll do the recipes. That's all kind of the basic stuff. But if you start going up, it's not that expensive. I mean, if you like $10 a month or something like that, I'm going to give them all access to anything new that I write, novel, short story, whatever. The moment I finish it, they're going to get a PDF of the Word doc.
That's so cool.
So they get to read it the moment it's done. They don't have to wait.
If you cannot wait, this is the thing.
And another level at, I don't know, 15. I can't remember what the dollars. I mean, but they're not $300 things. It's like $3 and $10 and something. Because I don't want people to have to pay that much money for it, but they just want to have access. But another one, they'll get to. I'll have a monthly Zoom call that we can just face-to-face talk about stuff if they want to, and they'll be able to like brainstorm. I need a character name for this and stuff like that. And so they get a Zoom call, and then I think the highest level we have is like $30. And if they do that one, that they'll get a signed hardcover copy of whatever book that comes out. And for me, that's like $5 a year.
Yeah, you're getting a lot bang for your buck.
So, but it's just my way of interacting with them, and I think that's what's so important in these publishing days, that you need to have your niche of people that are really your super fans. Where in the old days it was books went out to every bookstore in the country, and John Grisham doesn't know his fans. No. That's not a derogatory thing. I mean, that's just the way it's set up.
The way his business model works.
But if I get 1,000 fans that want to buy everything, I can make as much money if I'm publishing it myself than if somebody's buying 30,000 copies that I get. Star Wars, you get like 2% royalties or something like that. Now, when you sell 1 million copies, that adds up. But still, I just like when I come here to Dragon Con. I know my fans. I mean, they come in and they know me, and I like that connection rather than a bunch of invisible people and the author is 12 steps removed. And so Patreon is kind of the big thing. And coming up, I have the big Dan Shamble Kickstarter that'll be October 15th. That launches for a new novel, a new collection, and the card game and the jigsaw puzzle. So I think I'm going to end with this because this is kind of one of my big soapboxes. So my first novel was published in 1988, and when it came out, everybody was telling me, "Oh, this is the worst time ever to get into publishing." And then, like 10 years later, people were saying, "Oh, this is the worst time ever to get into publishing." And that's all I ever heard. That no matter what time it always was a bad time to get into publishing. I'm sorry, guys. This is the best time to get into publishing. That you, as an author, have so many resources, so many tools. You can do, like this Dan Shamble jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
I could make a freaking jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
I mean, how was that ever available before?
Right.
And I just, for my last Kickstarter, I'm a big craft beer drinker, and so we did Kevin J. Anderson pint glasses that you could get, and just the fact that I can interact with the fans and I can publish the books that I want to publish. Like I want to publish the Dan Shamble books. Other publishers didn't want to publish them, so. Screw you! I'm doing it anyway, and they're doing just fine, thank you. But I don't want any of this. That I still write books for traditional publishers when it's the right project. Yeah. And I have a really cool one coming out at the end of October called Nether Station. It's a cosmic horror, hard science fiction, but Lovecraftian. So it's like Alien, Event Horizon. There aren't that many. Pitch Black, like a scary science fiction novel. And when you think about it, space is pretty scary. If you're there out in the middle on the edge of space on a
Yeah.
space station,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of creepy,
There's a lot
right?
of
I mean,
danger.
that so. But of course, they're at this wormhole where the Lovecraftian Cthulhu gods have been locked up and sealed between dimensions, and
Mm-hmm.
because we're humans, we screw it up and let them loose and things like that.
As
So,
we usually do.
so anyway, that's from Weird Tales Presents. So that's from an actual traditional publisher coming out. So
Well,
I just like to do everything.
on the note of the interacting with fans, I can tell you the fans appreciate it, and it makes them more focused and appreciative on your work. So I think it goes both ways.
Cool.
So if a fan wants to follow you online, wants to get updates, do you have a website and maybe an online presence they can follow?
Well, the best. Well, I'm on Facebook and posting things all the time. So
Mhm.
just look up Kevin G. Anderson and you'll find it. Personally, the best way is if you go to wordfire.com and you can sign up for the newsletter readers list thing, because that's where I actually share. Here's the new book that's coming out, but it's inside. So here's the book that I just sold, and I'll be writing it over the next 6 months, and there's cat pictures and stuff too. So that. And of course, the Patreon thing, you'll be able to really keep in touch with me that way.
Mm-hmm.
Or Dragon Con. This is my
Yeah.
28th Dragon Con. I come to these all the time. The camera can't see it, but I got my foot in a Darth Vader boot because I hurt my ankle. So I'm coming no matter what. I'm going to be here. So.
Well, we appreciate it. Well, thank you for doing this interview with me.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan.
And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.
Make sure everything's good. Yep, it got all of it. Let me make sure the audio is still good. Looks like the audio got it.